Hello, you're listening to Chai Across Generations, a podcast to understand and maybe even bridge the gap between generations of South Asians. This is Nikhil.
And this is Shankar. Nikhil, how are you doing?
I'm good, Shankar. It has been a good week, and I'm feeling very energized. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It was really nice to see the responses to our podcast, wasn't it?
It was. I feel just so delighted and grateful for the response and all the feedback. And I just want to thank our listeners. Their amazing response has put us in the top quarter of new podcasts just based on listens through the first, week.
Thank you, dear listeners. That's really makes us feel very, very gratified. And I'd like to introduce the episode. Today, we're going to talk about what success looks like for each of our generations. And actually, this topic was suggested by Nikhil. So, thank you, Nikhil. And it turns out this topic has brought out our reflective side. And you may sense that mood in our conversation.
Yes, this is part one of our discussion, and we'll have the following part out next week. So let's dive in and get into the discussion. So today we are going to talk about the good life. And the reason we're doing this is because Shankar and I were reflecting on our last episode on dating and Valentine's Day. And what we realized is a lot of the challenge around talking about something like dating comes from different understandings of what a successful life is like or what a good life is like. So we figured we wanted to kind of explore this deeper root or deeper cause and see if it could maybe inform some of our conversation around dating and maybe even other topics.
Yeah, Nikhil, I really liked this idea when you proposed it. It really encapsulated so many important things. I thought it's a beautiful umbrella topic to start the podcast on. It's in sense the mother lode from which all these strains of education choices, career choices, partner choices, life choices emerge. So I really want to congratulate you and thank you for suggesting it.
Of course. Well, thank you for joining me on exploring it.
Right.
One of my early reflections is just, it seems obvious now that we say it that if you have different definitions of success or what a good life is, you're going to have a lot of differences in terms of how you make choices in your life.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how often I've actually thought about how my perception of the good life is different from my parents, right? Or from my elders, as opposed to kind of thinking about the individual, situations where they show up.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think, for me as well, it's not been intentional. It's not that I intentionally thought this is the right way to live a good life and so this is what I'm doing. It has been more intuitive. And so I'll agree with you on that. It's kind of funny. I want to start on a lighter note that the moment you said a good life, I was reminded of this song that I really love and used to play called Have a Good Time. It's a blues song. And it just gave me an idea for the intro music. But of course, a good time is not the same thing as a good life. They're different things. The other sort of random associative thought that popped into my head was the phrase "La Dolce Vita," which is an Italian, I believe, a translation of the good life. And I remember when I was a grad student, there was a Fellini retrospective, and my roommates, one of them was very interested in Fellini. And so we went and watched it. I don't remember anything of the movie. It was all in black and white. It was so many years ago, and probably also all the substances consumed in that period or after. But it just gave me, it just triggered these two random associations. But I just thought they were funny. Before we dive into the deep and heavy topic of a good life, I thought I'd share them with you.
Sure. Well, maybe we stay in the shallow end for a second. I also thought about two different songs related to the good life. One by One Republic.
Okay.
It's just called The Good Life. And there's another song, I think it's a Kanye song called The Good Life, which are actually two very, very different tones between, One Republic and Kanye, but, or Kanye's current name. I guess he has changed his name now, but I guess the idea of the good life evokes a certain feeling, right? That these different artists are trying to capture, and maybe we're trying to explore here too.
Right, right. Yeah, so my notions, the other thing that came to mind, the more serious thing when the moment you said a good life, for me is an unhurried life is a good life.
Hmm.
And that definitely has come, from all the years of my life experience. And an unhurried life is not necessarily a lazy life, but I value that very much in my current context. And I just realized that over the years, my notion of a good life has changed. There's no doubt about it. I think for a long time, I may not even have had a very clear idea of it. Perhaps I was pursuing goals that were not necessarily completely intentionally thought through. We are, influenced so much by our parents, our elders, then our peers when we go to college, and that influenced me. Those choices do influence us. And then when I went to school, my professors, and particularly if you go to graduate school, your advisors, a huge influence. And in a sense, it's probably taken me a very long time to undo all those influences and ask myself, what does the real me think about a good life? And honestly, the answer that came out was an unhurried life,
Hmm.
a life in which there is time to pause, there's time to reflect, and time to enjoy. Because truly, actually, life enjoyment requires us to be unhurried. I truly believe that, and that's informed a lot by my meditational practice and yoga practice. And as I said, in my grad student years and stuff, maybe a good time was, hanging out. You'd have probably seen me in a cafe, as I said, playing harmonica or something on a Sunday morning brunch, and that was a good time, and hanging out with friends and partying and all that. Um, but after all these years, I think it's changed, and the value of human connection. Um, Many other threads come up, um, and there are also generational ideas I'd like to touch upon, and how I came to all that. But that's sort of what's coming up. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I was curious to hear from you about if your perception of the good life has changed. So
Mhm.
that is something that I'm glad you shared, and I think we will probably return to in this conversation. What came up for me was how different I believe my perception of a good life is from my parents' generation.
Mm.
And I would love to hear if you agree with this, given that you are in the generation. Um, for my parents' generation, I feel like, against the backdrop of coming out of the village or a village in India, trying to make it in a bigger city in India, eventually moving to the United States, there was a lot of, I guess the backdrop of it is uh, reaching for something, reaching for a better life. And so some of the elements that composed their good life was financial stability
Mhm.
and early financial stability, ideally, usually in the form of being a doctor or an engineer, where everything else is secondary or tertiary to that. A family that is defined pretty, I guess, in a straightforward way as a marriage and kids,
Mhm.
and then a home,
Yeah.
a place to call your own. I see those as maybe the three pieces. For me, I think I want those three things, but not in the same way necessarily.
Mhm.
Um, I do want to be financially stable and independent,
Mhm.
but I'm willing to take some more risks. I chose not to be a doctor or engineer and
Mhm.
kind of try to do something else. I I want family,
Mhm.
but maybe I have slightly different perceptions of what that could look like. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this kind of traditional structure, and I think a lot of people in my generation are a little bit more open about what their families could look like.
Mhm.
And then home. I'm not super sentimental, honestly, about the idea of having a home or owning a home.
Right.
Be nice to own a home,
Right.
but I think there's an additional emotional element to it for my parents' generation. I will add there are other kind of values that I would layer on for me.
Mm-hmm.
Things like mental health, things like
Mm-hmm.
physical health,
Mm-hmm.
a general sense of being more balanced. You said for you, what did you call it? An unhurried life.
Mm-hmm.
What came up to me was kind of a balanced life
Right. Mm-hmm.
between family, friends, hobbies, career, community, environment, social. Um, so that's what came up for me. What sticks with you when I say that?
I love it. Yeah, I think I'll agree on the bit about unhurried being a basis for balance
Mm.
in exactly the way that you said. And they sort of feed on each other, right? So that the balance also gives you the opportunity to prioritize the unhurriedness. And it's maybe a byproduct of that. And somehow the unhurriedness is what gives you the time to think about the balance and put that in place. So it's kind of like, this idea of the Ouroboros, the serpent that eats its tail. Yeah. The other stuff that really resonated with me, again and again, I have to check myself that when I speak for myself, I'm not speaking for everyone in my generation. That's another thing that jumped out because I think I've had somewhat of a outlier experience in the US, and I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with that, but I have to catch myself in not over generalizing for my generation when I speak about my experiences. So I think I'm glad you pointed that out. For me, one concept has been very central in placing all this and understanding all this. That's the Maslow pyramid. You might have heard of it. This guy Abraham Maslow.
Right.
I don't remember the pyramid exactly, but the basic idea is that the base is security, food, shelter, safety, and then on that you build slowly on that, and then somewhere along the line comes intellectual, the work you do, the satisfaction you get in society, and then way at the top is like you might say spiritual or self-realization or asking yourself the big questions: what is the ultimate purpose of life and stuff like that. And I think this pyramid, in some ways, in one part of my family, it translates across generations. So I kind of think that my grandfather's generation was struggling to, build that core of stability, physical security, having enough to eat, well, having enough to clothe everyone, but yet making sure everyone got an education. That was very important to them. And then in our generation, I kind of think that we've reaped the benefits of having the physical stability in place and the education in place. And then we were able to kind of be explorers and go to another country and explore our work aspirations, you might say, to their fullest. And I believe that now the next generation can attend to the emotional side of things. Many of those things we didn't have time for in the earlier generations to pay attention to. But now the new generation, having had all this, now wants more. And I think that the new generation stands on a cusp at some level. And I think the fear of the older generation is that, oh, they have so much privilege. And I've also thought this way sometimes. You guys are so affluent, you're so privileged. You have no clue what it took to get all this. Will you just throw it away? And that's a fearful way of looking at it. But how about another way of looking at it? You guys have so much. We've put you on the springboard. You could go to the stars. Maybe your generation will generate more philosophers, more saints, for God's sake, for for artists, fine art, musicians, playwrights, people who talk about social justice. The kind of activists and who are trying to reform, say, social structures, economic structures. Who knows, right? So talking to you gives me that hope that we could view it from that lens and not take the more fearful view. And that just came out right now. And so I think a lot of our generation, now just talking about, my generation and then who came from India to the US and the generation that's growing up in the US, there's a big economic shift. I mean, India is, and I'll say this in a very qualified sense. We think of it as an economically poor country. And I use the word economically poor very specifically in front because I think India is very rich in many other ways. And we should never forget that. India is spiritually rich, India is culturally rich, India is human rich, it's rich in human experience, but it is economically poor. And there are certain structures there that have held back classes of society, which is very tragic. There's no doubt about that, right? And coming to the US, it gives, I think, all immigrants who come here a great opportunity to jump in and secure that economic prosperity. But I think there's got to be a lot of mindful and intentional thinking of how can the South Asian community not lose that spiritual treasury, that heritage, which could enrich our lives so much more. And so that's one lens through which I see it. But I've talked for so long. So tell me, Nikhil, what do you think?
You just dropped a lot of wisdom. So I will try to respond to some of it. The first thing that came to me was we've been talking about a good life at an individual level up to this point. But it makes me wonder about the good life at a family level.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because your point about economic prosperity. So I feel like when my parents came to the US in search of financial independence, in search of a new life, and then they were able to establish that, then what do you expect of the next generation, right? Like, I think there's something here about we have to understand that different generations will care about different things, value different things, and their arc will be different than what we might imagine. So my parents, I guess what I'm thinking about is the idea of ambition too.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I have been afforded more privilege and economic prosperity as a starting point than my parents had. If I took what they have and continued going in the same way, there's this idea of kind of building a financial empire, right?
Right.
My parents are into real estate and are into kind of investing in properties where they can. And that means a lot to them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't hold the same resonance for me. Maybe that'll change over time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not obvious to me that I want to continue doing that at the clip that they are currently doing that.
Right.
But I think to them, maybe their perception of a good life is around continuing to branch out, because that creates more economic prosperity and stability, right? That you can have family, generational wealth potentially.
Right.
So I'm reflecting on that a bit, and I think maybe the interplay between those two of, I think the older generation runs the risk of viewing the younger generation as not as ambitious or potentially lazy or something else, right?
Right.
Like it's a testament about their motivation,
Right.
when it may be about different values. So what I would like to do is, build a life that I'm proud of, where I can be good to the people around me, have really loving and caring friendships, connections with family members. I want to have as many of these conversations that you and I are having as possible with us, with other people in my life, contribute to social causes, like environmental causes, all of that. That feels to me like a meaningful life.
Right.
In a way that is very different from what my parents would say.
Right.
So I guess I'm thinking about this idea of what might the older generation think about the fact that I would define it differently and act differently than if they were given the same starting point that I started with.
That's a great question and a great hypothetical. That honestly, it's a fantastic challenge, because I don't think most people in my generation, and I myself included, could step into that easily. I'll still share with you some abstract ideas, and who knows, maybe in time, they will also. It may also come out that they've informed my personal viewpoint, but it's difficult for me in an instant to think, how would I have lived had I had financial security of the kind that we're talking about? But the abstract part that I can relate to is, and this is kind of harking back to the point that you said about expanding. I heard this sense of expanding the concern beyond individual to family, to community, to society, to the world at
Mm-hmm.
large. And that's a beautiful, expansive way of thinking. And it resonates with me deeply.
Mm.
We do want to take care of ourselves, obviously, first, because if you fall apart, then people have to come and help you. And that's not much help to anyone. Then you do want to take care of your near and dear and your loved ones and make sure that they are, economically secure, well cared for. But we do want to expand that concern to a larger and larger circle. And I think there's a deeper satisfaction that comes from that. I agree with that. That resonates very deeply with me. The thing that always strikes me when I think of of wealth and generational wealth is, if we look at the lessons of history, there is no family or kingdom or civilization that has retained generational wealth eternally.
Yeah.
The lesson from history is, it's a cycle. It grows to a point and then it falls and then it starts off all over again. Right? I think the real question is not whether we can sustain generational wealth. And I may not be speaking for my entire generation, this is just me speaking. I don't think that's the important question. I think the important question is, what do you do when you have wealth? When you have secured economic prosperity, what do you do with it? Because I am guaranteed that if the lineage for me exists, wealth is not going to be guaranteed. 5 generations down the line, we may be paupers and they're going to be wealthy again, and they're going to be paupers again, and they're going to be wealthy again. This is the nature of life, right? You look at all the great civilizations, right? There have been so many civilizations since the dawn of history. The ones we remember are for various things. One is they may have built some fantastic structures, but they also crumble in time with wind and rain and erode. But they retain some historical, tangible value for us, right? Maybe the Taj Mahal, or, if you go way back, there are even greater, beautiful ruins, right? But more enduring than those, I think, are the messages of philosophy, or, the deepest human reflection of music, or the fine arts, which we call, right? Right. Nobody remembers the day-to-day lives of a merchant or whoever it is, from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 5,000 years ago, right? But we remember some things. So I really think that one should aim high once we've secured some economic prosperity. And so that resonates with me a lot, that this idea of what is the legacy. And if a civilization has this kind of a legacy, then what kind of legacy do I as an individual have? And where does my personal goal and ambition fit in with that is something to think
Right.
about.
Yeah. I like what you said a lot about expanding our definition of what that wealth is over time and over generations.
Right.
Because I'm not sure that we tend to think that expansively when we're just thinking about our families, right? If it's, we have come to this country and we now have a better life, we can give our kids a better life,
Right.
then it feels like where that goes to next is, let's keep building wealth for our family. Let's make sure the next generation is secure, that we have maybe a bigger house or can live in a better neighborhood or a better city or whatever, which is totally fair.
Right. Reasonable. Yeah.
Right. But then there's the point of, but now that the generation growing up has the chance, the opportunity to do something else, like you said, to dabble in different careers, to contribute something new to the world, to better their society, their community. And I'm not sure that enters the discussion very often, right? In this discussion of the good life. I could be wrong. Maybe we do talk about that within our community as we think about this, but in my experience, it seems, and maybe we're just expanding kind of our consciousness, right, around this,
Right.
but I would love to see more discussion around that, around expanding the concept of the good life and the arc of the good life across your family generations to include the impact you can have beyond your family, into the community, into the world.
So that concludes the first part of our discussion. We'll be back next week for part 2. Today's music is a song called Have a Good Time, and this is one of my favorite blues harmonica players. His name is Big Walter Horton. So there was a very famous blues harmonica player called Little Walter in the Chicago blues sound. Big Walter is much less known, but he has a fantastic tone, and he was known by the pet name Mumbles because he used to mumble a lot when he sang. So anyway, if you guys like that kind of music, you can follow Big Walter Horton. Music is a really nice way to get to know another culture. And for me, the blues is a great window into Black African American culture when I came to the US. And so just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Shankar, for recording the music as always for our episodes. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed listening today. Follow us on Instagram at Chai Across Generations, or email us with comments, questions, or discussion topics at chaiacrossgenerations@gmail.com.
Hey, even I'm on Instagram now, thanks to you, Nikhil.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you. You got on this week because we launched on Instagram shortly after our first episodes came out. But, Shankar, you followed Michelle Obama before you followed me. What's up with that?
I'm telling you, it was completely unwitting. I had no clue what was going on. It just popped up Michelle Obama, and I wasn't sure whether it was a suggestion, but now I'm following her. Hey, whatever, you could do worse, right?
That's true. But speaking of Michelle Obama, do you want to talk about your birther controversy?
Oh, not. I thought we were going to skirt this somehow, but I have to come out. So on that first episode when we introduced ourselves, when we went back and I listened to it, I realized that I said I was born in Tamil Nadu, which is actually not true. It must have been something. Maybe our younger generation listeners will stop listening to the older generation after this, because most of what I say seems to now only be approximately true. But I was born in Jamshedpur, at that time in Bihar, which is now Jharkhand. And I actually my family moved when I was age 2 to Tamil Nadu. So there is a little birther controversy there.
Yeah, I think I shared first that I was born in Tamil Nadu, and you came in and just agreed, I guess. But I'm glad you've stated that. It's out there in the public record, and you've spoken your truth.
If I ever run for public office, don't hold it against me.
You're in the clear now.
Right.
And to our listeners, if you like what you've heard, subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks, Nikhil. See you all next time.